Hello, everybody. I am Jax James, NORML's State Policy Manager based out of Austin, Texas. Really happy to be with you guys today. It was quite a whirlwind of an election day and week, really, here in all of America, basically. And I'm joined today with Morgan Fox, and we are going to be talking about what has happened at the federal level, what has happened with some of the different state initiatives, and then even some of those local efforts that you guys know that we've been tracking across the country. So as always, I encourage y'all to comment where you're from. And if we have any insight for you, we'll make sure to share that with you. And of course, in the description of this live stream, you've got information about where you can go take action on federal action alerts, how you can support NORML's mission, and all of the work that we've been doing, not only during the election cycle, but now preparing again to hit the ground running for legislative sessions in a bunch of states starting shortly. So let me go ahead and bring Morgan on with me today. Hello, Morgan.
Hey, Jax. Quite a week, huh?
How are you?
I'm doing very well.
Good, good. Glad to have you with me today. We've got a whole bunch of people tuning in to hear about these results. Everybody's, I'm sure, been getting the normal emails about what's been going on, but I think it's a really good opportunity for us to connect live with the viewers today, see what questions they might have for us, where they're from. So let me go ahead and turn it over to you. What are some of the federal things that you are watching that are really important that we're excited about?
Well, I think first of all, we have to touch on the results of the election, which are actually still being counted in a number of key places. So as of this recording, we don't actually know which party is going to be in charge of either chamber of Congress. We do know it's going to be a pretty even split in both chambers. It's looking increasingly likely that we will not have to deal with Mitch McConnell being the Senate Majority Leader. Fingers crossed. I think we're going to have to wait and see what happens in Georgia with the runoff election. But I think that the Senate was really important in this midterm in particular because there were a number of candidates who were actively campaigning on legalization. And the one that was the most successful, John Fetterman in Pennsylvania, was representing a battleground state. NORML's been supporting Fetterman for quite some time. And I mean, when the guy was lieutenant governor, he was hanging a cannabis flag off of his office at the state capitol. So I think that the fact that a candidate who's putting this issue at the top of their priorities list and at the top of their public profile is indicative of a sea change in exactly how lawmakers are looking at this issue. And in this election in particular, we really saw a lot more engagement with both candidates as well as incumbents that they were willing to actually talk about the issue more. I think we saw a lot more Democrats being more publicly supportive, and we saw a fair amount of Republicans doing the same thing. On the other hand, you also had some Republicans who were doubling down on their prohibition support and using that as a lever issue to try to attack their Democratic opponents as being soft on crime, which was a very important issue during this election. But overall, I think that we saw that pro-cannabis candidates tend to be more successful than not in this election, and that going forward, we should expect to see more candidates be much more public and outgoing about their position on the issue, especially as they see that it's an increasing priority for voters. The fact that there's likely going to be a very even split in both chambers, I think actually is going to be a good thing. While some people might think that that means nothing will get done, the expected red wave that did not actually happen would have probably been much worse for cannabis policy reform. Not that Republicans aren't increasingly supportive of ending prohibition, but it's a much lower priority, and they do tend to be less supportive than Democrats right now. But we're working on them.
The work never ends, right? But you mentioned Fetterman in Pennsylvania, and I think that might be a good segue for us to talk about some of the state efforts. And, first of all, we saw some chambers flip in Philadelphia and Minnesota, and those could potentially help us to pass legislation in upcoming legislative cycles that will be starting, I believe, in January in those states.
Absolutely. I mean, it's fantastic that we got two more states, and now we have the way paved for us to be able to get a couple of more through state legislatures, which, traditionally the voters have been the ones that are responsible for passing these laws. And over the last few years, we've seen that really turn around and see a lot more support from state legislatures across the country. Unfortunately, a lot of bills that were in session this year for legalization or even medical got stalled in their state houses. I am thinking to try to chalk that up to the fact that it was a midterm election and a lot of state lawmakers maybe didn't want to rock the boat. But we did see a lot of forward progress. And I think that next year, regardless of what the situation is at the federal level, at the state level, we are going to continue to see a lot of movement in the right direction.
Agreed. I mean, Rhode Island was the one that we saw this last May, right? That did it
Mhm.
through the legislature. And now we have some great results in Missouri and Maryland. So Maryland had a legislative referendum. So it put a ballot question on, will we legalize in Maryland? And that passed. So we had a little party about that. That was really great. And then also in Missouri, that was a actual ballot initiative, collection of signatures, validation, getting that on the ballot and the whole campaign around it. It's a fairly robust addressing of many different issues, including expungement and perfecting the medical program. So those were some really big wins that we had in those states. Have you any opinion on how that might impact some things happening, perhaps in the lame duck or in next session federally, now that we've reached, 21 states that have adult use cannabis programs in their state? You are muted.
Sorry. Yeah, I think that in addition to the fact that we're now going to have a handful of additional lawmakers who, if they're representing the desires of their constituents, are going to be increasingly committed to seeing positive change on the federal level that will help resolve the conflict between state and federal law when it comes to cannabis. Um, I think that we're probably still a long ways off from being able to accomplish that. But at the same time, we're already seeing forward momentum. We saw the House earlier this year pass the MORE Act. We saw the introduction of the Cannabis Administration and Opportunity Act in the Senate. And while we don't necessarily have the votes in the Senate yet for that, we now have four more senators who are from representing legal states. That doesn't guarantee their votes on the bills that we want to get passed, but it puts them in a position where there's going to be significantly more pressure for them to vote the right way on this issue when they get the opportunity, or potentially risk political consequences. So, with an additional four people in the Senate and another handful in the House representing these two states, and the fact that we're creeping ever closer to half of the U.S. population living in states where cannabis is legal, I think really spells a positive congressional landscape going forward. And I think that we can expect to continue to see momentum and continue to see the issue rise in priority. In fact, next week, NORML's Paul Armentano is going to be testifying in front of the House Oversight Subcommittee on Civil Rights and Civil Liberties in a hearing that was held with bipartisan support. Representative Jamie Raskin and Representative Nancy Mace on either side of the aisle, both supportive of cannabis policy reform and descheduling cannabis, really moving to have this conversation wherever possible just a week after the election. So, I mean, in addition to the expected incremental changes that we hope to see introduced in the lame duck session in the Senate, and then hopefully quick action in the House to back the Senate up on this, I think that the fact that we're continuing to talk about this issue and that folks from both parties are talking about it and that they're doing so in such a timely fashion really sends good signals to me for what can happen in the next session.
And, hopefully those are 4 more yes votes. But as our viewers know, we put out the voter guide. So don't worry. We will make sure that you know exactly how everyone voted on everything when it comes to these measures. So I know Morgan was very helpful in making sure we had those federal votes in there properly, holding people accountable for those. Now, let's talk about for just a moment the states that unfortunately didn't pass. So, South Dakota has been a total roller coaster ride where it passed one time, and then it was litigated and overturned, and then now they're going after it again, and it did not pass this time around. So clearly more work to be done in South Dakota. Same in North Dakota, it didn't pass. In Arkansas, I know that there was some conversation about improvements being needed to the bill, but the way that we look at it, of course, is that it would be ending the arrest of tens of thousands of people every year. And so this is all good policy. Work definitely needs to continue to be done in those states so that we can continue to up that voter count and make sure that next time around we can get those measures passed. Now, of course, in between the next time there's a measure and right now is going to be the legislative session. So, of course, I will be doing updates on bills as they are filed and making sure people have the action alerts to engage with their legislators. And it's going to be extra important in some of these states where we have a little bit more of an uphill battle to get the accomplishments that we saw in Maryland and Missouri across the finish line. So I just want to.
Right. And just to put it in perspective for the folks at home, so when we look at the polling across the country, cannabis policy reform support tends to be stronger among younger voters and Democrats, although it's definitely climbing in older voters and Republicans as well, and is majority support in each of those. But when you look at this election cycle, we're talking about the states that actually lost were, first of all, they didn't lose by huge margins. It wasn't a shutout by any stretch of the imagination. But these were conservative states in a midterm election, which generally doesn't see a lot of youth vote turnout, particularly in less populous states.
Low voter turnout in general, really.
Absolutely. And then you also have to think that in traditionally and historically, the election following the election of a Democratic president is usually met with a huge conservative backlash on every single part of the ticket. And so the fact that this election was one of those elections, I think, and the fact that it was a midterm, and the fact that these were conservative states, and the fact that, especially in the Dakotas, these are states where there's very low population density, so it's much more difficult and much more expensive to be able to get the message out to voters. Right. It was, kind of created a perfect storm for these things to not quite perform as well as we would have liked. Not only that, but apparently in South Dakota, there is currently an investigation underway about whether or not state authorities use taxpayer money to actively campaign against the measure behind the scenes.
Which is illegal.
Yeah, and would not surprise me at all, considering that the South Dakota governor,
they were making,
she funded a lawsuit from a couple of law enforcement officers using taxpayer money, brought it in front of a judge that she appointed, and it got the 2020 measure tossed. So there's also a long history of ballot initiatives of any issue. If they come up twice in consecutive elections, that people tend to vote no a lot more than they vote yes, because the average voter thinks, oh, well, we saw this issue before on the ballot. It didn't work. We're just going to vote no down the ticket on it. And that, unfortunately, is a sad reality for ballot initiatives that narrowly squeak by as without passing, and then are able to get on the next ballot. This is something that has happened in state after state, issue after issue. So it was really unfortunate that these didn't pass. But as you said, we've got state lawmakers to work with, and we've got 2 years from now with a presidential election where there's guaranteed to be very high turnout.
Well, let's talk about some local stuff. So, we're talking about, conservative backlash after a Democratic president being elected. Well, I want to talk about Texas. I live in Texas. And last May, Austin passed a local initiative. So people might be saying, oh, well, Texas doesn't have ballot initiative. They have to change the laws at the state level. Correct. So to change the law, actually have to do it through the legislature. But there's these things called home rule cities, and they have some discretion where they can make laws regarding anything unless it's expressly prohibited. And so Austin is a home rule city. And last May, we passed an effort where we wouldn't pay for any testing of THC. Nobody would be arrested or cited for possession of personal amounts of marijuana, and no knock warrants were banned. And then we saw the effort expand to San Marcos, Killeen, Elgin, Harker Heights, Denton. Most of those areas, with the exception of San Marcos, are very conservative areas. And so, might have been a bit on pins and needles about that, but we saw these measures pass, and not just narrowly. They passed like epically. We were very happy with how that turned out. So here in Texas, we've got these now 6 cities, major cities, that have taken this effort forward. And I'm really proud of the work that not only Texas NORML did, but Ground Game Texas and all of the affiliates that have been working with them in these locations to make sure that we get out the information, get out the vote. And, when you look across Texas at how a lot of the candidate races went, it went conservative. So these were conservative voters out there voting and supporting this policy. So while I really want to get the work done at the Capitol, I'm really glad that these stopgap measures have been enacted. Now, I did see in the comments that some of you guys are watching from Texas. So if you happen to live in Austin, San Marcos, Harker Heights, Killeen, or Denton, or Elgin, just so you know, this only is a directive for your local police, your local police department. So if something happens with a sheriff or a DPS agent, this does not, you would still potentially be arrested and cited for that. So I just want to make sure everybody's real clear. There's a few other local items that I wanted to touch on. In Colorado, they've got this ability to opt out of having regulated markets in municipalities. And Colorado Springs was looking to overturn that ban. However, that did not pass. But in Cripple Creek, Colorado, that is a hard name to say, we were able to turn and vote in favor of this ordinance to now allow retailers to operate in Cripple Creek. Now, in Lamar, Colorado, there was an effort that NORML opposed. It was a ballot measure seeking to reaffirm and strengthen the ban on local retailers, but that was opposed successfully and did not pass. In Connecticut, there were 2 towns that decided in favor of ballot measures to permit retail cannabis sales. And a 3rd city, Litchfield, did end up rejecting a measure like that. Now, in Michigan, there were a lot of different cities that wanted to repeal the prohibition, and it was kind of split down the ballot. And if you go to norml.org/election, you can see a whole list of which cities voted to allow for retail sales and which ones decided to continue with the ban. We're looking to get the final results out of Montana. The way that Montana works is they have to go through a process of, validating the ballots. And in one of these races, it may be determined literally by 2 votes, Morgan. Like 2 votes. That's super close. So literally every vote counts.
That's wild. I'm seeing something in the comments. Somebody says they're shocked Michigan is not 100% on board. And I should point out that in every single state that has passed adult use, the vast majority of localities actually opt out of allowing cannabis businesses, or at least cannabis retail businesses, within their jurisdictions, which forces them primarily to urban centers. Now, one of the things that has always bothered me is that a lot of opposition groups that are trying to subvert the will of the people and try to keep cannabis illegal, after they lose a statewide election, will then immediately begin working on localities and trying to support local bans as much as possible, and then turn around and say that the program isn't working, it's not taking a big enough chunk out of the underground market, et cetera, et
Because they
cetera.
won't let it.
Yeah, and I mean the intellectual dishonesty of this argument is just staggering. You can't interfere with the success of a new policy and then step back and say, "Oh, well, this was a failure." It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And we know for a fact that if you ban regulated cannabis businesses in a locality, you are just propping up the continuation of the unregulated market and preventing the benefits of regulated markets from being able to reach the people that supported these measures. So, I think we're going to continue to see that in state after state, and I think that local control is something that both supporters and opposition actually genuinely want, and it's our job to convince local governments that it is pure folly to try to prevent cannabis businesses from being able to operate within their jurisdictions, because they're just handing over the market control to unregulated operators.
Yeah. And even in, OG California, there's still localities where it's banned, right? So if we're surprised about Michigan, we should be really surprised about California. And in Colorado, right? Colorado Springs, like the second biggest city or something like that in Colorado, doesn't have legal sales inside of its city limits, right? So very frustrating. Now, there's two more states that I want to talk about the local elections before we pivot to answering any questions you might have in the comments. Ohio. So in Ohio, there's already over 24 municipalities that have worked to depenalize personal amounts of marijuana. NORML Appalachia has worked with coalition members, and this session or this election cycle, voters in the following towns wanted to also depenalize the personal amount of marijuana possession. So that's Corning, Helena, Kent, Lorville, Rushville, and Shawnee. Now, the measure in Helena is subject to ongoing litigation, so we'll hear more about that shortly, hopefully. I mean, litigation, I say shortly. You know how that can be, right, Morgan? And then in Rhode Island. So Rhode Island passed legalization through the legislature back in May. And of course, now we're dealing with the municipalities voting to opt in or out of allowing regulated markets in their cities. And so the referendum was approved by 25 out of the 35 or 31 Rhode Island cities that were looking at it. So there are going to be 6 cities where it did not pass. And those are going to be Barrington, East Greenwich, Jamestown, Little Compton. I don't know if I'm saying this name right, but Scituate and Smithville. So if you live in those cities, you will have to leave the city limits to go and purchase your legal cannabis when the program is up and running. So did you have anything you wanted to add about those local ordinances real quick, Morgan?
Not really. I mean, other than the fact that I think a lot of people might tend to overlook them, whether they're in legal states or in prohibition states. But those local ordinances are really where the groundswell begins for legalizing cannabis statewide. The same thing happened in Colorado with Denver initially decriminalizing, and then that spreading to other cities, and then statewide decrim, and then legalization. So that old adage, all politics is local, definitely does apply with cannabis. And, this is one of those situations where we're fighting against over a century of the status quo. And so we need to take our victories where we can get them.
Absolutely. So let's look at the future, right? So you are going to have some lame duck stuff that you're working on, some little fixer bills here and there, right? But then, hopefully in 2023, we're going to see more movement on the more robust legislation at the federal level. And then if you're in a state, many states are going to have their legislative cycles starting in January or February. Here in Texas, I noticed that there are a lot of people in Texas in the comments. So I'm going to go ahead and say this. Our pre-filing deadline or first day is going to be November the 14th. So that's 3 days, y'all. On Monday, they can start pre-filing bills for the legislature, and it will be starting in January up in earnest at the Capitol here in Austin. So we will be linked in to all of the states and what is being filed in each state. So make sure you are subscribed to the NORML newsletter so that we can get you all of the action alerts for your cities and states across the country. So Morgan, you've been joining me like the last Friday of the month pretty typically. This is a one-off because elections, but we are going to be switching up the live stream a little bit, right? We are going to switch days. We've been doing it on Friday, but we are going to move these to Tuesday lunches. And Morgan will join me at the last Friday of every month. So this will be our last live stream on Friday, and we will come to you starting on Tuesdays after the Thanksgiving holiday. So just so everybody knows, expect that change. Do you have any final thoughts or any comments here that you want to respond to, Morgan?
No, I think that we covered it. I just would recommend that everybody check out the hearing on Tuesday at 10 o'clock Eastern. We'll be posting the link to the live stream throughout the day on Monday and sending out additional information as well. So yeah, please make sure to check that out. And then if anybody has any questions, our doors are always open.
Morgan, we had a chance to look at Paul's testimony because, of course, He has very detailed professional testimony, and I am really looking forward to seeing him give it. He's got some really great points. And just so everyone knows, we will be putting the full written text of his testimony with all of the resources and bibliography up on the NORML website. So stay tuned to that. Otherwise, we will come back and see you the Tuesday after Thanksgiving. So thank you for joining me today, Morgan, and thank you for everyone who was watching, commenting, and asking questions. And if you voted, I appreciate you so much, and I hope you have a wonderful weekend, guys. So see you later, Morgan.
Thanks for having me. Big shout out to all our veterans out there today.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Bye, guys.